This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 134, Running Knowledge Economies, Using Production-Based Theories.
Hello and welcome to the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie, and today, economic theory and the digital economy. How much are we trying to apply theory developed for production-based economies on economies driven by knowledge? That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast. Well, look, if you look at almost all conventional economic theories, they all revolve around economies where people make stuff, physical stuff, like the labour theory of value. We look at how much it costs to make things based on people and energy and distribution costs. But in the knowledge-based economy, those costs are relatively small, but we charge a lot for knowledge. So doesn't that turn a lot of economic theory on its head? And how can an economy survive if it doesn't make anything physical? Well, Steve, I mean, we need food and furniture and we need cars, but a lot of people these days are employed not doing that. They are employed in this knowledge-based economy, producing nothing physical. It's the tangible versus the intangible. So what does that mean for economics?
Well, the funny thing is economics is already standing on its head because the arguments that economists make about how firms produce are complete bunk and empirically have been false ever since capitalism came along, let alone economic theory about capitalism came along. Because an essential part of the way they analyse the cost of producing a physical item is to say that you have a fixed amount of capital and you vary the amount of labour you're applying to that capital. As demand rises, you have more workers per machine. And at some point, you get an ideal ratio of workers to machines. And then with increased demand, and they always see us being in the area where you're past that point in terms of the level of demand, each additional worker added to the machines adds less output than the previous worker. So you have what's called diminishing marginal productivity. You're paying the same wage to the workers. They're producing less output per unit. Therefore, the costs rise, so you have rising marginal cost. It's neat, it's plausible, and it's complete and absolute bullshit. And if you look at what firms actually do, any sensible firm, and in fact, funny, when industrialists had this theory explained to them by researchers who were critical of the theoretical argument, looking for empirical data about it, they literally thought that economists were anti-capitalist, because they're saying that they must think a businessman a reactionary, anti-progressive to believe we'd actually manage our factories this way. So what you do if you're a sensible capitalist, if you have 10 machines, and it's the ideal ratio of 10 workers per machine, and you have enough demand to just turn one of the machines on, you hire 10 workers. You don't turn on the second machine until you get up to pretty much another 10 workers being needed, et cetera, et cetera. So the machines remain idle until they're needed. And when you design your factory, you design it so that when it's working at absolute full capacity, it's at its most efficient level. And that means that consequently your output per worker tends to be pretty much constant or indeed rising as the factory approaches full capacity. That translates in rising marginal productivity and therefore falling marginal cost. Now, when firms are surveyed about this, and there have been something like there's been at least 20 surveys done, every last one of them has got a result of at least 89% and normally 95% of firms saying they have constant or falling marginal cost.
Well, you turn on that second machine when you've got more than 10 workers, because in the hope that you're going to meet the demand to meet the full capacity of that second machine. You're still going to need to turn it on, though, aren't you? Because you're going to have that growth curve reaching up to the point where you meet that.
Yeah, but the engineers would have designed the factory so that as the number of machines being turned on rises, then the air conditioning costs for the factory fall. I mean, this is the thing. Engineers, thank God engineers design factories, not bloody economists, because they do design them sensibly to reach, as they've said themselves many times, maximum efficiency at or near full capacity. And then the role of the management is to decide when to build the next factory. If you start to approach that point of full capacity, then you go to build another factory later. And it's important to have that spare capacity. It's not wasted because you're in a competitive environment where you have rivals selling similar but different goods to yours, if they stuff up, either with a product laws, if somebody brings out an Edsel, for example, or if they have a failure in the hardware, so the Goodyear tyres start failing, then you want Firestone to have the capacity to bump up production immediately, to take up that vacancy and then squeeze out its competitor. So there's good industrial and good marketing reasons why firms have spare capacity, do not use all their capital in one time, and therefore face falling marginal cost. But so that what I'm saying is that the economic theory is wrong to begin with. And now what you're throwing in as you talk about the digital economy is that you have things which are produced with effectively zero marginal cost.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I make a piece of software. It's all sales from there here on in. I just need to maximize my returns by selling as many as possible. It's not going to cost me any more to produce it.
Well, there are other parts. Well, I mean, any software package has bugs. Speaking as an expert in designing software,
sure.
And
but those costs apply whether you've sold 10 or whether you've sold 10 million.
You have to have a larger call center. You've got to train more staff about it, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I have a software package, Minsky, as you know, which has a call center of one, a programmer of one, a bug tester of one, and they're all the same person.
Yeah.
When you start expanding, then you have you have to put a hierarchy together. You have a call center in one location. Usual outsourcing crap would normally be used by most of them, and you therefore have some marginal cost,
right,
with expanding it. But
you're talking a much smaller percentage of your total revenue is going on.
Yeah, you fixed this in this case. Again, the one thing that economists found when they asked industrialists about how do they manage their companies, they expected them to understand the ideas of fixed and variable costs. And even Alan Blinder, 1999, asking about prices, a major study covering 15% of America's GDP, he thought the same thing. And he found when his PhD students went along interviewing people face-to-face to remove any confusion about the answers and the questions, they said that most of them didn't have a real concept of fixed versus variable costs. But when you look at things like software, the fixed costs are by far your development costs. And you have to have a large, there's a large period of working out the feasibility of a software package. There's then getting enough money to finance it. You have huge financing costs. The venture capital costs in software can be huge. And then you've got to market the whole damn thing. All these are big costs. But then once you've got it actually established and selling, like they take, for example, the classic being Microsoft Office. Pardon me, I meant Microsoft Office. That markets itself. And in that sense, then you have a very low level of constant per unit marginal cost as you have to expand your call centers as more people become victims. Pardon me, I meant customers.
I'm not even aware that they had a call center to solve. I thought you had to fix all the problems with Microsoft Office yourself.
I'm having great fun right now with Microsoft on my big laptop. There's the Alienware thing. I've got a 32 gig of RAM. The bastard. Every time I log in, we are unable to log you into your account. Right. And everything goes back to default bloody settings. And I'm pulling what I've got left of my hair out. And can I call anybody to ask about it? You click up. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. You get caught in that bloody infinite loop of getting into the fax. Fax sounds a bit like another word.
Well, this brings me nicely onto my next question, really, because if it's so bad, why
I got faxed. I've been faxed by Microsoft, yeah.
If it's so bad, why is a competitor not there? And this brings up the whole question of scale in this digital economy. How come companies become so dominant and there isn't somebody taking on Microsoft Office and providing an alternative?
Well, that again comes down to the first mover advantage, because there are many packages before Microsoft came along. But once you've got dominance in an area like that, you can basically get the same situation that IBM used to operate under, which was, quote unquote, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. And I used to say, yes, but somebody should have. Because when you looked at their hardware versus what was around at the time with things like Hewlett-Packard and so on, and even some of the Burroughs and Unisys stuff, there was better stuff out there. But just once they've got that marketing presence, everybody goes with that particular brand. And now, of course, it's Microsoft that everybody goes and buys. So you get a dominance, you get a monopoly position coming out of that, even though there's far better software for word processing than Word, far better software than Access for databases. Access has almost killed the database industry rather than providing a better alternative. So there's many things like that mean you get a position of dominance, and it's incredibly hard to shake you. And that, again, neoclassical economists would analyze in a sort of a idea of a monopoly setting a higher price and selling a lower volume than the market would actually want. It's more about just getting stifling the innovation that leads to new and better programs.
Well, and free trade agreements don't help with this either, do they? Because we tend to think of free trade agreements covering the tangibles rather than the intangibles. But then if we look at, a lot of what's happening now between the United States and China, for example, a lot of that is related to the intangibles. It's related to IP protection. And if we looked at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a big chunk of that was trying to stop, from the US side before they pulled out, was trying to stop copyright theft in Australia, for example. If I protect my country's IP, then, my companies can expand their sales with relatively little cost to the rest of the world. So it's sort of like a free trade agreement becomes a way of protecting asset values, doesn't it, really?
Exactly. The classic in American cases, literally, and I love this, mate, literally known as the Mickey Mouse Clause. You know what the Mickey Mouse Clause is?
Well, it's obviously related to making sure no one copies Mickey Mouse. And
indeed, every time Mickey Mouse is about to go out of copyright, Walt Disney's companies and go and lobby the relevant senators and get the length of copyright extended. So it used to be, I think, that the rule for copyright used to be the life of the creator plus 21 years or 17 years. And I think that's quite reasonable. That means that you have to come up with a new idea, like even like Mickey Mouse. You get, as an author, you got the rights to a book as well, and then after a certain number of years, you're taking care of your heirs, etc. But after a certain number of years, bang, it goes out of copyright. Now that should be the rule. Americans, because they're hanging on to this control of digital and brand and trademark,
because they're so dominant at it.
They've extended it to 75 years. Now, screw that.
If I go, hello, Pluto, I'm going to get a letter now, am I? It's for breaching copyright.
You just ruined our commercial venture. I'm sorry.
Hopefully they haven't listened this far. So companies...
I got on one of my YouTube channels, I had a bit of an excerpt of Yanis Varoufakis answering a household, the governor's household question for the audience in BBC Question Time, and I got a copyright query over that.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering where this takes us then, if we've got, because it becomes again this case of if you dominate and then you've got your government behind you helping you dominate because they want to protect, they see your business as an asset that's worth protecting, then you're getting to a situation where as these companies become so dominant, what hope have other economies got? Like Australia. What does Australia produce? If Australia didn't have oil, what the hell would it make its money from? Because it's not anywhere in the digital space.
No, and it's actually shot itself on the foot with that stupid rule about putting in a backdoor to software courtesy of the Five Eyes spies network, not wanting us to be able to talk privately. So yeah, it is a major problem. And again, economic theory is misleading. It takes you away from the important thing, because the important thing here is how do you achieve innovation? The outstandingly important thing about capitalism that makes it a desirable social system is the extent to which it encourages innovation. Now, you can stuff that up by things like the TPP and the copyright controls that the Americans put in place, where the whole idea is to, once you've got an advantage, to stifle anybody else getting in there. So I would be rewriting all these things to say, what can we do in such a way that we reward innovation but also encourage it? And that things like patenting are essential to rewarding innovation, but equally, ending patenting after a certain length of time is essential to encouraging it to happen again.
Yeah, and it becomes a question, doesn't it, of just what can you patent as well? Because you have those crazy things where, if you swipe a mobile phone in a particular way, then that's a patent. Most people would say, well, given this sort of device, it's the most natural behavior. So it's there's a difficulty, isn't there, in defining exactly what you can protect. I'm actually going through that right now, I've got to say. Hopefully I'll be able to tell people about it sometime in the next year or so, but I'm designing a new software package, which is a totally unique interface for data. And I'm facing the challenge that, to some extent, having courts for a while started to defend things like having a scroll bar as a look and feel. And
preventing others from having scroll bars. That's exactly what you don't want. But you do want for a while the person who produces scroll bars to get royalty payments from those who use scroll bars. Now, I haven't invented a scroll bar, but I've invented something which makes it much easier to navigate multidimensional data. And I want to get some money out of that for a while. I want it to be able to finance me fighting in neoclassical economics with decent revenue rather than shit revenue, as I've been doing for the last 45 years. But you then want that look and feel to be something others can use and pay a license fee for some length of time, after which the copyright will expire for the legitimate reason that you want to give somebody else a chance to innovate. But that hasn't at all been the way this stuff has been done. It's all, in particularly with the American fetish for suing the arse of anybody who moves in your direction, and other ways of fighting if you get too close. We need to get away from that and enable innovation.
Now, companies which have got the highest turnover in the world are still basically focused on tangibles. So there's Walmart, obviously a retailer selling stuff. You've got the Chinese state grid. So you've got utilities, you've got oil companies, you've got car companies. They're the sorts of companies that make up the top 10 for the companies with the highest turnover. But the most profitable companies in the world, well, number one is Apple. Number two is Berkshire Hathaway. So you've got the finance sector moving in there. Most of their money is coming from services. So this is a big problem as well, isn't it? That we've got the situation where, the high turnover companies, which also tend to be companies that employ lots of people, like Walmart, versus the companies which are actually making the biggest margins, are making those margins because they're not employing people. So we have this big issue of what does everyone do? Now, conventional economics would say, well, look, if you lose your job, that's fine. You just get a job creating something else. But that can't go on forever, can it?
No, it can't. This is the important issue about the technology development we're seeing right now, where a whole lot of jobs which were menial jobs in various ways. There's some level of skill needed, but not professional intelligence. Though even some jobs involving professional intelligence are now being taken over by software. If you look at things like they're called deep neural networks now, in terms of diagnostics, it's getting to the stage where you're better off going to a virtual doctor and detailing your symptoms, because they can draw on an enormous database of both symptoms and cases. They're going to be better at diagnostics than most doctors 99% of the time. So there's a whole range of areas where the need for labour to get work to get to it to produce stuff is going to disappear, and we have to, I think, really be facing ourselves in a world where that happens. We want to have a world where innovation still takes place, but where you still have a decent standard of living for everybody. And given the extent to which it's possible to produce without labour now, and will become even more so in future, we have a potential for capitalism to turn into a even worse than a feudal system. That's why I keep on going back to the example of the Hunger Games. Well, we simply need to keep most of the population quiet, while the rest of them can enjoy the bounty generated by the ownership of capital and the machinery that transforms energy into useful work, which is what is the ultimate source of GDP. Yeah,
well, now, of course, the big thing to own is data. That's the key constituent of the knowledge economy, and Google and the like are doing very well at gathering it and using it. That sort of stifles innovation if you need that data and you haven't got it because Google's got it. But of course, it's our data. It's our behavior, isn't it, that they're making money out of. I didn't see Adam Smith mentioning that in The Wealth of Nations, but it's a whole new form of monopoly, isn't it, that we don't seem to have any control over.
Well, that's again, I haven't made a great deal of use of it yet, but Brendan Ike, who invented JavaScript, and is a very nice man, I might say, a friend of mine, and he has developed a new browser he calls Brave. And the idea of Brave is that rather than Google making the money out of you clicking on ads, you'll make the money out of you clicking on ads, because you get various points rewarded back to you for visiting particular sites. And so Brendan is trying to address that, and I hope Brave actually manages to break into the browser market. and take it over, because that is designed the right way, as you say. But most of it is about getting a monopoly and hanging onto it. And Google's made an absolute fortune out of that.
Yeah, and it's not just the browser, it's everything else that Google has control over. So it's your Google device at home, it's Google Maps, it's how they all work together. That's the problem, and we become so dependent on it, and we give away so much for the convenience of it. But
at the same time, there's some brilliant stuff. I mean, I couldn't imagine life without Google Maps these days. And Google as a search engine was far superior to Yahoo when it first came out, and has maintained that ascendancy. So there's extremely good stuff that's come out of this. But the point is, at some point you want to say, okay, there should be a transition of this from being closed source to open source. There should be some way that we say, what we want, you have to give somebody an advantage for them to put in the effort that's necessary to do this large-scale innovation we see in things like Google and the deep brain work and so on. That has to be there. And Bill Janeway does a very good job of explaining that in doing innovation, doing capitalism in the innovation economy. But at the same time, you have to break that as a control after there's been a reasonable length of time for the people who did that innovation to reap the rewards, and then it becomes open source, it becomes free available to everybody. We still haven't struck that balance properly, and the American legal system in particular is making sure we'll never get there.
Well, I mean, on all of these levels that we've talked about, so for example, the fact that people are losing their jobs because they're being replaced by artificial intelligence, the fact that data is driving so much now, and it's difficult for people to replicate that, and then the fact that big companies are becoming monopolies in this space, a relatively small number of monopolies, which will almost certainly be stifling innovation. Those three things alone are big things which are really influencing society today. And I look at conventional economic theory and says it's got nothing to do with any of this. And in fact, we don't seem to be approaching it in any way or trying to tackle it in any way, because we still read those old economics textbooks.
Yeah, and one of the main dangers capitalism faces is economics. And it's not the Marxists, it's not the lefties, it's the mainstream, because when you look at how it evolved, neoclassical economics began effectively with the Corno's model of oligopoly as a mathematical exercise in differential equations back in the early 1800s. And then you had Jean-Baptiste Say, who was a great champion of the utilitarian what became neoclassical theory approach, but he was a minority. And the dominant school was the classical school of economics, which, even though it screwed up by getting energy wrong, courtesy of Adam Smith, misinterpreting and not understanding the importance of the physiocratic focus upon land and energy, it was still a more realistic model of capitalism than the neoclassical. Along comes Marx and uses the labour theory of values as an argument for the overthrow of capitalism. And pretty much at that point, you had a suppression of classical school and a rise of the neoclassical school. So within about a 20-year period, you went from the classical objective theory of value approach being wiped out and taken over by the neoclassical school, which when it happened back in the 1870s, there was a legitimate alternative way of thinking about capitalism. You could say, okay, it makes sense. Yes, it does make sense to say maybe utility is the basis of value rather than effort. It does make sense to say maybe marginal cost rises, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. But every time that they push themselves trying to establish one of their foundations or to push it further, they got to a logical conundrum where they got forced to be wrong, and they stuck with the belief system rather than with saying, oh dear, we need to revise our attitudes here somewhat. And what they've ended up doing is supporting capitalism and championing it for features it doesn't have. The whole idea to think that capitalism's main feature is the capacity to reach equilibrium. Give me a bloody break. Its main feature is how it handles disequilibrium, how it handles change. And talking about totally ignoring the distribution of income, that's one of the dangers. The financial sector, that's another one of the dangers. All this stuff is left out of mainstream economics, so it's no wonder it's helping destroy capitalism.
And, we don't seem to be tackling those big issues that a lot of it is driven by data these days. So competition, privacy, democracy, security, not to mention, this ability to concentrate wealth in the hands of a small number of people who run the companies that are doing this. And it doesn't seem seem to be any way of controlling it, or certainly any policy. China, of course, approaches it all through a massive firewall. The US probably doesn't need to do that to keep control, because most of the companies we're concerned about actually come from the United States. The UK and Europe really doesn't have very much at all in the way of data products, just a lot of people to be taken advantage of. This doesn't sound very sustainable in the long term. It looks like, China's going to block itself out. The United States is going to take control. And it's not just control of the economy. It does become control of democracy and large parts of society. Don't know how you stop it.
Yeah, I mean, it's much too complicated for a textbook, particularly a mainstream textbook. Things like the 5G network, for example, what we're seeing over Huawei right now, that there are legitimate reasons why it's possible that Huawei could be a spying unit for the Chinese government. At the same time, Australia completely blows that case out of the water by passing laws at the behest of the IT industry, the security forces, rather, that the IT industry has to put backdoors in its bloody software so that the spooks can check and see what messages are being passed around to catch those terrorists, Dobbie and Keane, in their private conversations. So, we have a real mess.
They could just...
And economic theory is anything but a way of being able to resolve it.
They could just pay, and they could listen into these private conversations.
That'd be true. Let's actually suggest that.
They could just become a subscriber.
A couple of customers, yeah.
So, but I mean, I guess that's the final point. Is the answer through all of this regulation? Do we need more heavy-handed regulation? Like Europe introduced the GDPR, for example, which allowed us supposedly to see what data companies have got on us. But so what? I doubt many people have really looked at it. Or do we just accept, that this new age makes life easier and see where it takes us? I'm just a bit worried that, at any level, we don't seem to be addressing it.
No, I think, capitalism as a pure market system is a fantasy. You always have a state in there, and the state, of course, has a role in creating money, as I frequently argue, but it's also got a case in creating the framework in which capitalism operates. And again, that's why I think that Andrew Schonfeld book from all those years ago is a nice instance to show how different cultures have more effective elements of enabling that innovation to occur than others. And Germany on that front came out very well because of its idea of having worker boards, what's called Aufsichtsrat boards, parallel to the overall management of the company board, where the stakeholders had a role as well as the shareholders.
Doesn't matter if companies aren't employing people anymore, though, does it? I mean,
that's the other thing. If we get to the stage where capitalism doesn't give jobs to virtually anyone except the skilled workers in designing technology or operating it, if we're talking about, we have to take off production off planet in the next 1 century. At that point, the state has to be the income distribution to generate the mass market.
Right. Until it does that, we're going to have the wealth concentrating more in the hands of a few. We're going to get more protests like we're seeing right now. They're only going to get worse, surely. And then if we've got regimes which become more authoritarian, as they see that's the only way to cope with it, as we're perhaps seeing in France, then that availability of data is going to make it easier for those nations to become more authoritarian as well. It's not a very pretty picture.
You have drones and Face ID and stuff like that. Yeah. So it is not a simple case of pure market for capitalism versus socialism. You do need to craft a mixed society. And given the tendency, the trend in capitalism now that we can produce so much without labor, and therefore making 90% or 95% of the population unnecessary, you have the two choices, the Hunger Games or some redistribution system, which still enables the part of the population that innovates to be able to do that. It may even be a more creative society than the one we're in right now, if we actually enable that. We certainly have to have an income where a basic income is provided for everyone, regardless of whether you work or not. And that's one reason, even though most of my colleagues in mainstream economics are fans of a job guarantee, I'm more inclined towards a universal basic income, just to mean that everybody gets enough to live and live moderately comfortably. But if you want to do extremely well, you can get out there and do some capitalist innovation. We want to make sure it doesn't cause the global economy to overheat, the global environment to overheat. There are all these issues. So we need to devise a mixed system. And again, one of the main barriers that are happening is mainstream economic thinking.
Steve Keen, you're talking socialism again, you raving Marxist.
Lefty capitalist, there I am.
All right, good to talk. We'll catch you again very soon. Thank you.
Okay, mate.
And there we go. That's episode 134 of the Debunking Economics podcast. Back again with another one next week, episode 135, strangely enough. I'm Phil Dobbie. Steve Keane will be back as well next week. Thanks for listening.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.